Hello, welcome back to episode 13 of the Invictus podcast with me, Gareth and Sab. How are you doing, Sab?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. It's been a great week for myself in the Chinese Grand Prix and Invictus, which we'll get onto later on. We've got the Singapore Grand Prix to have a chat about for this weekend, and also some driver news to chat about. So again, we should have plenty to discuss this evening.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be another fantastic episode, the 13th, and hopefully this one isn't too unlucky and we get any more audio issues, which seem to have been plagued with on my side. So apologies for you guys if you're listening. Any issues from my side, I will try and get them fixed as soon as possible. But we'll go straight into it, and we've got the Singapore Grand Prix coming up this weekend, and it's one track that I always enjoy. I always enjoy the racing around here. I don't know about you, but um, is it? I mean, we titled this thing "Is Singapore the New Jewel of Formula One?" Is it starting to take over from Monaco? Is that street circuit that everyone enjoys to watch?
Well, we discussed, didn't we, in a previous podcast about Monaco and whether it still has its appeal and stuff like that. And for me, I've always said I prefer the racing, in recent times anyway, the racing around Singapore to Monaco, just because you get more of a race around Singapore. It's the original night race, isn't it? As it's dubbed, the F1 night race, and in just recent times, we've had some cracking races, some big incidents, plenty of talking points always from this circuit. One thing I think everybody always loves watching it, especially on TV, is when you can really see the driver's eyes and see the concentration of them as they're flying around this circuit with the real heat and all the other conditions what they have to endure during this race. I wouldn't say it's overtaken Monaco as the jewel of F1 quite yet because it's still not the glitzy glamour of what Monaco is, where it brings out all the A-list stars. But it does bring out many great stars. But I think in its own way, it is starting to gain a very good reputation as being one of those races that everybody looks forward to in the season.
Well, I mean, we look at it as if you take it on a street circuit basis, is it the best street circuit on the calendar at the moment? Because I mean, we've discussed this in previous podcasts that
Yeah.
there are plenty of street circuits on the calendar now, and of course we've got the likes of Hanoi and Vietnam coming in next season. Is Singapore the best street circuit, or is it
I
purely because of we've got like the obviously under the lights and it does that kind of give it that sort of edge compared on its competitors.
I would say it's the best street circuit at the minute. It's close. I think Azerbaijan is right up there. Recently, they always seems to bring some sort of crazy race there, doesn't it? But for me, for my opinion, I absolutely love Singapore. Like I said, we've had many incidents and things going off in the race. It's always fascinating to see what Singapore can do to host the race as well. Not just the race itself, but I've got several friends who are out there this weekend and several friends who have been there, and they've all said they put on a great show for the fans outside of the circuit as well, and they really embrace it and make it something special, which is what what every track I think new tracks coming into Formula One need to look at and learn from. That it's not just a case of throwing 20 cars on a circuit and let's get going. You've got to embrace the whole circus that is F1, and with Singapore, I think just because of the added element of it being a night race, I think for me it is the best street circuit at the moment. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, it's funny actually because I it's one of the only sort of Asian circuits and that I'd really like to go to. I've travelled all around the States, all around Europe, and I've never really had that sort of like inkling to go and travel around sort of Southeast Asia. But the Singapore Grand Prix is definitely it has I don't know it definitely has a whenever you look at the television pictures and the fans there, and like you say, how they have the fan village, and the fact that the entire city seems to stop for the Grand Prix, it definitely makes it an attractive one to go to. And yeah, I tend to agree. It's probably the best street circuit on the calendar for, yes, it is close with Baku, and Baku is hard because it does, a lot of Baku, I'd say, doesn't feel like a street circuit. You'd almost say half and half, because yes, it is. You do have the street circuit in the second sector, but the first sector and obviously that the straight kind of make you, it detracts away from the fact that it is that street circuit, because you've got such a, I guess you would sort of, I'd say a street circuit is somewhere where it makes it really hard to overtake, and it's all about kind of picking your places, maybe even doing it on strategy. So the likes of Monaco, the likes of Singapore, and even to somewhat something like Australia. So Baku, I think, is although it is a street circuit, I think it does have that edge on the others, with the fact that it's got way more overtaking involved. But we've had Singapore on the calendar since 2008, and there's been a lot that's gone on in those what will be
Oh yeah.
the 11th edition. And I mean, you can go back over just through the last few years, and obviously we had the ridiculous start with Max, Kimi, and Seb in 2017. You had Lewis's absolutely blinding pole position lap last season, and then of course you had the inaugural race in 2008 with Crashgate. And there doesn't tend to be these tracks that sort of like join the calendar and sort of own these iconic, what now iconic moments in Formula One so quickly.
I agree. Yeah, it's like you say, with some circuits, it takes a while for them to bed in and gain a reputation and make it their own statement. But Singapore, it's from the very first moment in Formula One, like you mentioned, Crashgate. We had all sorts of incidents. We also, I think, if I'm right in saying, did Felipe Massa also drive off in that race with his fuel hose still attached to his car? I'm sure it was 2008. So there's loads of instances like that at the Singapore Grand Prix. I find it amazing that it has, but that's the nature, I think, of this circuit, because it's so difficult because of the humidity and the sweat they go through, the fluids they keep on board to make sure they're fully hydrated for this race. It's they often say, drivers, don't they? It's the hardest race of the year because it's just full on for like 2 hours nearly of pure concentration. If you don't concentrate for a second, you are in that wall, and with the added pressure of the humidity and everything else on top, it's no wonder in a way that it has quickly gave us all these iconic moments in F1 at the moment, because it's just a race of pure concentration and a mixture of everything else. And if you're not on it, and you're not fully aware of what you're expecting from it, it's going to catch you out. I feel just like say with Lando and George Russell and Alex Albon coming into it this weekend. I don't believe they've even raced round here, so it's going to be a huge test for the likes of those guys to come into a race like this and get straight into it. Yeah, they'll have been on simulators and stuff, but it'll be a huge test for them, and that again is another reason why Singapore has got this reputation of giving so many iconic moments, because it will bite you if you're not on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the fact that we do go to running at night, and so they'll have to adapt their body clocks, because of course the timings were different with the race due to it being accessible for European viewers to watch. So they have to obviously change how they set up their day compared to when we've just left the European season. And equally, you have the likes of like you said, the humidity, and these drivers, they lose up to 4 kilos and have to drink upwards of 8 liters of water over the race. And that then doesn't include, we've seen news stories over this week or so about the poor air quality around Singapore at the moment. So you've got this poor air quality, which is trying to keep these drivers oxygenated throughout the race, and equally keep the engines oxygenated, because it's as much of a strain on the engine as it is on the driver, I'd imagine. But yeah, it's a very strange race, because it is obviously very humid, very warm, but you drive into the night, so it does have that sort of edge over other street circuits, because it's the way that the drivers have to set up for it is completely different to what they're used to for the rest of the season. And I think that's what kind of gives it a real sort of I think that's why the fans kind of have really taken to Singapore, because it is literally drivers out of their, what you would say, comfort zone.
Yeah, definitely. It really tests them, doesn't it? It pushes them to the limits, and yeah, it's a personal goal of mine, I have to say, to visit this race. I've had, like I say, several people tell me I've got to do it, I've got to do it, and I'd love to see what it's like to see these cars racing around the streets at night, at their limit, like you say, pushing as hard as they dare without colliding with. Well, I was just thinking of another incident. I don't know if this is correct or not, but wasn't there an incident at one point where there was isn't there a subway under the track, and one of the cars lost some power because of the train going underneath? Was that Singapore as well? I'm sure it was a Red Bull
Yeah,
at that time.
I think it was the static with
That's right.
the magnets, or the
Yeah,
electromagnet or affecting the radio and the electrical systems in the
yeah,
Red Bull. I think I believe it was Mark Webber.
yeah. It was Mark Webber. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
So
just, I would say, incidents like that, and he also had a big accident, didn't he, when his brake fails? Was it down to turn one time? So another two incidents just off the bat there of many what has happened with this race, what can affect the race. Who knew that a subway would be able to affect a Formula One race? It's crazy, really, and that's another reason, along with many reasons, why I'd love to visit, and I absolutely love watching this race, because, like you say, it tests drivers. It gives us the opportunity to see them at their very best, pushing as hard as possible for near on 2 hours.
yeah, and can catch out the best drivers. Like we said, that was that incident with Seb and Kimi and Max that obviously tangled up with Alonso, and we've seen Michael Schumacher in when he made his return into Mercedes 2 years in a row. He went deep into, I believe it was turn 7 or turn 8, and crashed at the same corner in 2 successive years. So it's definitely a track that can catch you out if you're not on it, as you said, and you're not. It's all about concentration. I was just looking at their schedule, and their schedule that the drivers will be doing this weekend is fascinating, because the Grand Prix starts at a local time of 8:30 in the evening, running till after 10 o'clock at night, which means that they go to bed at 5 a.m. and get up in the early afternoon. Breakfast is served at 3 or 4, and lunch is around 8 p.m. So it's these guys. It's just the fact that they will have to adapt, because they'll be doing that now. They would have
Yeah.
they basically got there. Well, I mean, we saw photos and videos of the drivers getting there and going out for. I believe George Russell was going out for runs at about 1 in the morning to try and acclimatise himself for being up at that sort of time at night. So it must be really tricky for these guys, and yeah, you have to really credit them for what they do, because it is definitely a sight to be seen. But it's like, if we look at sort of the race winners that we've had in Singapore, and it's crazy, because obviously this is the 11th of the race. We've only had three winners, which is crazy if you think about it. But you've got Seb and Lewis on 4 and Fernando Alonso on 2. Now, is that just a case of we've had this Mercedes dominance? So obviously Lewis picks up his 4 there. Then before that we had the Red Bull dominance, and then before that we had sort of that Ferrari sort of era where sort of the 2010s, the late or zeros was sort of where Ferrari were still relatively competitive. Is it just that, or do you think there are certain drivers that really suit certain tracks?
I think Lewis, you point him out. I think Lewis really does suit this track, doesn't he? You mentioned earlier the mega lap he did in qualifying last year, he really does seem to go really well in Singapore. Seb as well in his Red Bull days, he was very good around here, and he is still very good. I don't think it'll be quite the same this year for him with that Ferrari, but Mercedes, they'll be probably wants to be. Yeah, I'd say you do have certain drivers that really do suit to this track because one, they've got the experience of it, and two, they're just probably better at street circuits than some people. But I think as well, you've got to take into consider that Mercedes are that dominant. But you talk of Mercedes dominance, Red Bull have been eyeing this race up, haven't they, to have the potential to go for a race win. They took those engine penalties in previous races to focus on this race. So you can't really count them out this week, and I'm sure they'll be battling with the likes of Ferrari for the podium places or even a potential win. You know what Max is like, don't you? So I wouldn't be surprised, to be fair, if we eventually see Max's name as a race win around Singapore.
Yeah, and that kind of leads on quite nicely into the next part of the podcast, and obviously building up to the race itself. And who needs that win more? Do Mercedes need it after Ferrari took the last two, or do Red Bull really need this one? Obviously, Max started the season pretty spectacularly, and the last two races hasn't gone his way. Of course, retired in Belgium, and last week in Italy, collected the back of Perez into turn one. Spent the rest of the race trying to recover. I believe came in 8th at the end of the race. Who is it that needs it more? Do Mercedes need it to kind of get back on track with their sort of dominance in F1, or do Red Bull kind of need this to just reassert that sort of fight with Ferrari?
I'd go with Red Bull because Red Bull were hot on the tails of Ferrari, weren't they, for second place, and Ferrari have pulled two wins out of the bag in a row, which is kind of firmed up their position once again. Red Bull will be desperate, I think, to try and steal second place in the constructors from Ferrari. They'll see that Ferrari are struggling around most tracks this season. So if Red Bull, around a circuit like this where that chassis will be absolutely mighty around Singapore, you can imagine Red Bull will be targeting at least one podium place, if not two podium places, if Alex Albon can get up there alongside Max. But with Mercedes, I think it's a case of now they've got such a strong position in Formula One, both in the drivers and the constructors' championship. I think they'll probably get to a point now where they'll probably take less risks than what, say, Ferrari or Red Bull do, because they are in such a heated battle for second place, whereas I think Mercedes know that as long as they're still finishing on the podium and picking up odd race wins here and there, I think they'll be pretty comfortable to the end of the season. So I'd probably say Red Bull are the ones who are more in need of a win this weekend.
If that's the case, obviously you'd say that Max was definitely the one that's most likely to go for that. But obviously we just said Red Bull and Mercedes, and obviously the two constructors needing to, Mercedes not so much, but wanting to get back on track, but Red Bull definitely. But Bottas or Max, if you had to have two of those two going up against each other, Max obviously has had two poor races, and he's looking at going for possibly even second in the championship, and it could be up against Valtteri, and Valtteri equally. Yes, he's been on the podium a few times recently, but he hasn't won a race since Baku. And in that time, he's just seen that sort of competition between himself and Lewis stretch and stretch and stretch. Is it Max that needs a win just to recover from the poor double header in Belgium and Italy? Or does Valtteri kind of really need to take this one to Lewis? And if he doesn't pick up the win, does he need to finish above him?
That's a good question. It really is a good question. I think I'd go with Max because he's had such a good season, hasn't he, so far? And those I don't think they'll have knocked his confidence those two races, but he'll not be happy with how those races went. Yeah, he was expected to start at the back in Italy, so he probably wasn't ever going to get a podium place, but he thought, I assume he thought he would have at least managed to work his way to the top five, and that just didn't quite happen for him. And then the incident in Belgium, which could have easily been avoided, which saw him crash out. Whereas Bottas, it's a weird one. Bottas seems to has it. I don't know what you think. Has he gone back to the Bottas of last year in some ways? Because even though he's looked better this season, I don't think he's really putting up any threat at all now to Lewis's challenge of the championship. So does he now have to start looking, like you say, at Max coming along, challenging him for that second place in the championship? Because if Bottas isn't careful, I think, and he keeps limbering along, picking up an odd podium here and there, and then only finishing top five, Max, being Max and the season he's had, I think he'll see an opportunity to beat Bottas. And I think Bottas has recently said, "Oh, there's a possibility of catching Lewis," but I just don't believe that at all. Bottas needed, in my opinion, to take advantage of any problems that Lewis had recently, like in Monza when Lewis couldn't get past Charles and Bottas had the opportunity and he couldn't get the job done either, which for me says a lot there really, because that Ferrari was just hanging on, wasn't it? And hanging on, and Bottas just couldn't do it. So yeah, I'm not sure what to make of Bottas. He's in a weird phase, isn't it? And you say he hasn't won for so long, whereas Max, I think, the ignoring the last two races, Max is the hot property at the minute, and Bottas has just got to be a bit wary of what Max may do this weekend.
Yeah, I don't know. It is tricky because you look at it and you think that Lewis is obviously he's kind of had that fantastic first half of the season, and but Valtteri's only finished off of the podium 3 times this season. Which you wouldn't believe, the fact that there is that gap between the two, and he's only finished off the podium in Canada. He was fourth. He retired in Germany, of course, and then in Hungary he came in eighth. But apart from that, he's picked up 2 wins, 5 second places, and the rest were thirds. So he's not doing badly. Whereas we've seen Max has only finished on the podium, what, 5 times this season. So I think I think the reason why people see Max as he is that he seems to be overperforming the performance of the car, which is what great drivers tend to do. Whereas Valtteri should be getting these podiums. Max probably shouldn't. We definitely shouldn't have been getting the wins that he got.
Yeah.
But it's 101 points between himself and Lewis. So the cynic in you says it's not going to happen. It would have to be a cataclysmic fall apart for Lewis to fall away to even Valtteri catching him up, let alone Max.
Yeah.
And there's a 36-point gap between Bottas and Verstappen. At the moment, Verstappen, his biggest rival, is Charles Leclerc, who after these last 2 race wins is now only 3 points behind after jumping Seb. Seb's on 169, and then you've got Charles on 182 and Max on 185. So it's it's a funny one, because you'd say that Valtteri needs a win to kind of to reassert himself back in that sort of mindset that he was at the start of the season. We all said at the start of the season that Valtteri was a completely different driver, and compared to what we'd seen so far. But it does feel like Valtteri sort of slipping back into this. Oh, Lewis has got this. I'm just gonna see out the season once again. But now he's got that contract through to next year. What does he do now? Does he go, well, I might as well see out the season and start again next year and push once again for another one? Or do I push twice as hard towards the end of this season and try and push Lewis as hard as I can and try and get it so that he gets inside Lewis's head before the start of next season? And if that's the case, then Max and Charles are going to have to play catch up, because really over the next few races, the Mercedes should have the upper hand when it comes to car performance on the tracks that we've got.
Yeah, I agree with the second one you say. For me, if I was Valtteri, see, he's only got that 1 year extension, hasn't he? He doesn't want to slip into the, oh, let's just see the season out and then let's go for it again next season. Because if it doesn't work out next season, then you've gone on your plate. Then you've got potentially a slump in form at the end of 2019, and then not great form in 2020, and then suddenly his contract's up for negotiation again, and he probably won't get a renewal. So if he wants to retain this Mercedes seat beyond 2020, he's going to have to show that he can fight with Lewis and pick up some wins like you say, because it would frustrate the hell out of me if I was a fan of the team if Bottas just decided, well, Lewis has pretty much got this now, like he did last year. Let's just see the season out. You would want to hope he would have a bit of fight in him. I hope for his sake he does, but there's no guarantee. Who knows? But there's no guarantees Mercedes are going to be the top team next year. So if they did decide to do that, and then Mercedes are on the back foot next year, it's suddenly even harder for him. So yeah, I would, if I was him, look to just try and push on, ignore the fact that he's X amount of points behind Lewis, and it looks like it's pretty much a done deal for Lewis to win the championship again. Just focus on the next few races, one race at a time, and try and get a race win under your belt, or race wins under your belt, because like you say, Mercedes are going to be mega strong these next few races, and if he's in the best car at some really strong races for Mercedes and he doesn't win because Lewis is so superior to him or anything else, then it's just going to look like a bit of a failure for me. And somebody who's in that Mercedes car, in my opinion, yes, Lewis is phenomenal in that car, but somebody who's in that Mercedes car should be picking up more race wins, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with that. And so, talking about people that need to sort of push on over the next few races, and we'll move on to your field of expertise and McLaren. And we talked about this last week, and we talked about it a few weeks ago. And it's the last two races we knew before, or as the season was going on, we knew at the start of the season that McLaren weren't going to be particularly strong at Belgium, and they weren't going to be particularly strong at Italy. The gap between themselves and Renault is closed after Renault's fantastic result, that fourth and fifth in Monza. And equally, you've got the likes of Toro Rosso are still sort of pushing up, and they're not too far behind Renault, and even Racing Point have been picking up points here and there. What do they need to do over the next few races to sort of lock in that fourth position in the Constructors' Championship?
See, I don't know if you've seen, I will answer your question shortly, but I don't know if you've seen Andreas Seidel come out recently and said, our objective isn't to go out and win fourth place in the championship. Our objective is to see out this season with the small upgrades we're bringing, but to focus on 2020 to make sure what we've done this year then is an improvement for next year, because we're looking long term, which is the right approach. I think people will see McLaren have made good progress this year, and yeah, fourth place is good progress for where they were in the Honda days, for example. But I don't think it's a priority for McLaren to finish fourth. They know the improvements they've made this year, and they will be just fully focusing on next year. But to go on what you were saying, I think it's going to be a tougher test for Renault this weekend, because they seem to struggle on these more high downforce circuits this season. They've obviously proved that they've got a good car for low downforce, as proved in Italy recently. But I think McLaren, with some of the races coming up, I think the car will be much suited to them. The car clearly wasn't suited to Italy, even though Carlos was going well until that unfortunate error in the pit stop phase. But I think with McLaren around here, Singapore, I think they should go better this year. And as long as as long as they get back to what they were doing before these two races, which was picking up solid points every weekend, then I should imagine they would uh, consolidate that fourth place. Obviously, there's going to be different instances and different scenarios happen from now to the end of the season. It's not going to be as plain sailing as that. I'm sure of that, but McLaren just need to just carry on that consistency what they had before the summer break, and I'm sure they'll be fine. But like I say, I think Renault will probably struggle a bit more this weekend just because of the high downforce demands Singapore Grand Prix bring.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see what Renault do for the rest of the season because obviously they won't want a customer constructor like McLaren with a Renault engine in the back of it now beating them in the constructors championship. That will be embarrassing for the French team if that's the case. So I think they're going to really try and push over the next few races. We heard Danny Rick saying that he felt a lot more comfortable in the car after Monza, and they're probably going to wait until I'd imagine the likes of Japan and Mexico will be their next be looking at pushing it. So McLaren, I think if they are going to, and yes, if you say that Seidel has said that they're looking for 2020, but they will still want that extra spot or winning or fourth place money finishing the constructors because we do know that unfortunately this is a sport all about money and it will probably play pretty big into the development of the 2020-2021 car for McLaren. But I think one person that needs a good weekend coming up is Lando, and
Yeah.
we have said that he's been brilliant this season. He's just been very unlucky, but he's dropped to 14th in the drivers' standings. He's only on 25. That's over half uh, what his teammate Carlos has got with 58 points. And I think Lando needs a good result. Of course, he would have got one in Belgium if he hadn't had that last lap failure. But apart from that, he hasn't really been up towards the top end of the grid, the end of the race since Austria, where he came in sixth.
No, he has struggled recently, I do agree, but he has had a lot of races what have been taken out of his hands with failures of different kinds on the car. He's even bemoaned himself, saying he'd have had more points if there wasn't for the reliability issues on the car. I still wouldn't say, though, that I know this isn't what you're saying, but I still wouldn't say it's been a bad year for Lando at all. It's been definitely a great debut year for him. I didn't expect to him to hit the ground running like he did. He has looked fast in several races, like Belgium, for example. He got himself into fifth, and nobody really was catching him up until that failure. So there is definitely potential there for him to only grow and get better. But like you say, I think this Grand Prix, I think yes, like I mentioned, it's going to be a completely new Grand Prix for him. He's only ever raced it in the simulator back at the MTC. So if he can go well this weekend, then it'll do him the world of good, and that confidence will probably come back. That great instinct what he has of getting good overtakes and what have you. It'll all come back again. But yeah, just for me, I think it's more down to the fact that reliability just on his side of the car really more than Carlos has hindered him, because I think otherwise he'd be a lot closer to his teammate in the championship.
Yeah, I would agree with that. He has had an unlucky year when it comes to car issues, but I mean, heading back towards the top end of the pack, and we'll go back, and we had a conversation about it last week, and we'll go back to Ferrari. Now, what do they do for this sort of set or like last third of the season? Because we know that they said before the season that Seb was the de facto number one, and they were going to give him preference. But we've seen Seb kind of tail off recently. Not he wasn't at the races in qualifying, and he hasn't out qualified in Charles for 7 races, and obviously Charles has taken the last 2 victories. And yes, some of you may say that Seb won in Canada, but it was taken away from him. But I mean the records will say that he came second, and but do Ferrari now kind of give that sort of, do they start to put their faith in Charles Leclerc for the second half of the season, because, or this last third, because he is most likely the driver that's going to take them into the future?
You wouldn't blame them, would you? The form points towards Charles being the driver for him at the minute. Unluckily for Seb, but you wouldn't I wouldn't argue with it at all if they turned around and said for the rest of the season now, Charles is our main guy. We're going to make sure he gets all the best strategy and everything else, whatever. We're going to focus on getting him as far up the grid as possible. And like you say, he's our future champion, let's say. So I would not be surprised in the slightest if Ferrari turned around and said something like that. I don't think they will, because what does that do to Seb's confidence? Do you know what I mean? If they publicly come out and say, no, Seb isn't our number one driver anymore, we're moving on to Charles, Seb's confidence is already in the gutter, isn't it? I can't imagine Ferrari would be a team that would go out and then kick him some more, but then Ferrari have been ruthless in the past, so you just don't know. But I can't imagine them saying that, but they will probably say internally, but publicly it probably always look like it's Seb the number one driver, just because it's Sebastian Vettel, four-time world champion. I think it would belittle him a bit if he and knock him down a bit if he was suddenly a number two to a so-called rookie upcomer that's only just joined the team. So if that was the case, I wouldn't be surprised if we ended up seeing a possible retirement or a move of teams in the future for Seb, whether it be the end of the season or the next. But yeah, I cannot blame Ferrari at all. The way Charles drove in the last two races, I don't think any team would not give him the full resources after what he's just been doing.
Yeah, you'd expect it, and I'd like to see it from Ferrari putting their faith and their trust in Charles to take them forward. And Charles, 7 podiums so far this season, 2 of those, of course, being wins the last 2 races. Seb, 6 podiums. But it's crazy to think that Charles has actually retired from 2 races this season, obviously in Monaco and in Germany. Seb's yet to retire this season, yet he's 13 points behind his teammate in the championship. So that shows you sort of where they are at the moment, because even with these mistakes that we saw, and we know that Charles is very self-critical, and after those mistakes that he made, just pushing too hard in Monaco after having to start at the back, and then equally in Germany, skating off when he probably would have ended up winning that race. And yeah, it's as we've said before, it's a big decision coming for Ferrari as they look to make a decision about who's going to lead the team into the future. But once again, as we move on with a nice little segue here into the future, and Haas announced their 1-year future, and it's retaining Grosjean. Now, let's hear your thoughts on that one.
Well, I am as amazed as most people I've seen on social media today with that news. I could not believe it. I'll be honest. I think if when we did our predictions of who would be driving for Haas, I don't think none of us predicted Grosjean would still be there. But I think if I were rightly saying, we both said none of them would be there, and it's ended up the complete opposite. I'll be honest, I can't believe Grosjean is still there. You've got somebody on the market in Nico Hulkenberg, who, for me, is streets ahead of Roman Grosjean. Yes, Grosjean's picked up some podiums if you want to be statistical like that, but that was years ago. Now Grosjean is not the driver compared to Hulkenberg. I think Hulkenberg, being that a constructor in Renault, could bring a lot of experience to Haas and knowledge to Haas about how things go on there, and give a different approach to the way Haas are going. But clearly, for me, it just sounds like they're just happy with just how it's going, and I don't understand why, because this season for me has been terrible for Haas. They've gone backwards. They've had off-track drama. They've had on-track drama. They've had Grosjean himself crashing in the pit lane. It's been a bit of a disaster, and it just it just surprises me. The reason I was thinking earlier, the only reason why I could possibly think why Hulkenberg hasn't been chosen is the fact that him and K-Mag just don't get along. So is that a case? But then Grosjean and K-Mag also don't get along. So it's just I just cannot understand at all why they've gone with Grosjean again, because they were umming and ahhing this time last year whether to keep him, and they still did, and this year it's not been any better. So yeah, it's just total baffling for me. I just if that's where they want to go, I hope for their sake they prove me wrong, but I just think that's probably the worst decision they could have gone with.
Well, 8 points is what Grosjean currently has in the championship. Only 10 less than his teammate. So it's been a poor season for both. Yeah, I had predicted that they made a double driver swap and that both lost the drive, which I think probably would have benefited Haas. I think they probably needed to freshen it up, but yeah, Gunter Steiner came out and said that they needed the experience at this point of their time on the grid. That they didn't want to like make wholesale changes. But I do think, yeah, as you just alluded to, that it is a case that I just don't think that they could have paired Magnussen and Hulkenberg up together. I don't think they would have. We know that there's friction between the two. And I think that they thought it would be too much of a risk to take. They don't want to have another driver pairing just at each other like they've had with Roman and Kevin this season, and at least those two seem to be able to kiss and make up after the races. But it is a strange decision because I think we all assumed that Roman was moving on this season because he's not had a great time in the cockpit. He just continuously seems to be bemoaning and slating the team and the performance of the car. So yeah, it is a very very strange decision. And I mean, what does that mean for Nico Hulkenberg now?
That is it, isn't it? Because I don't think now he has a future in F1 because we also heard today, didn't we? Robert Kubica announcing he's leaving the team, which is probably not the most surprising news we've had all year. But I can't imagine Nico heading there either, because Williams are a team that's relying on the input of money, and you're probably looking at Latifi, who will probably go into that seat next year alongside George Russell, and then the only other seat is the Alpha, and I can't see him going there either. I think they'll probably do what Haas have done and retain both drivers for next year as well. And then where does Hulk go from there? Does he go back into the WEC where he has raced before? But I can't. As far as I'm aware, there isn't any seats available there. So is it a case of probably dipping into what I like to call the Formula One B category, the Formula E league, where a lot of Formula One drivers have gone into recently? I honestly don't know for Hulkenberg. I feel for Nico Hulkenberg because he's a very, very likable guy. He's very approachable. He's everyone seems to like him, even if you don't support his team. He's one of those drivers. He's been very unlucky in his F1 career with different decisions and what have you. But I just think, unfortunately for Nico Hulkenberg, we're going to have an F1 grid next year without him on it.
Yeah, it seems that way. It does seem like Latifi is bound to take over from Kubica, and unfortunately for Robert, the fairy tale didn't have that magic ending, and he's just been outshone by George, and he's never looked comfortable in the car. So I don't blame him for wanting to leave, and it sounds like he's going to be making a move to the DTM next season. So hopefully, when he gets back into saloon car racing, he might be a little bit more competitive, and obviously the strain on the body and isn't as much in the DTM. So hopefully he can do well because he was a fantastic. And Lewis gave him some high praise today, saying he was one of the best he's ever raced against when they were back in their prime in the sort of 2007, 2008 sort of years. And But yeah, Nico, it does seem like Formula E is his best option now, and I do enjoy Formula E. It's definitely got its detractors and its critics, and sometimes with good reason, sometimes with people just not enjoying. So I definitely the noise is definitely something that gets to a lot of people, and understandably, but it is a good place to put these drivers, and there's a lot of talent in Formula E at the moment. You've got the likes of Daniel Abt, you've got Antonio Felix da Costa, Mitch Evans was good this season. Of course, Stoffel Van Dorn moved from McLaren to HWA there last season, and obviously a lot of ex Toro Rosso and Red Bull drivers have ended up in Formula E, the likes of Jean-Eric Vergne, Sebastian Buemi. So there's plenty of opportunity for him if he goes there to make a statement. And who's to say that he goes to Formula E next season, does 1 year there, and then in 2021 or something like that, we might see a new team enter the grid. We've heard stories about the likes of Porsche, BMW, Ford, even SMP were looking at creating a Formula One team. So who's to say there won't be spaces left on the grid for him when the new regulations come back in?
Yeah, that is true, but my only worry for Nick Hulkenberg is time really isn't on his side, is it? He's in his 30s now, and the problem with Formula One at the minute for the likes of Nick Hulkenberg is there's so much talent now coming through the ranks that it's making it even harder for him, because a lot of teams now are starting to favour the young up and comers now, and you're starting to see that new generation filter in, and if look at Pascal Wehrlein, for example. I know they're not in the same ballpark, but he dipped out of Formula One and he's been trying to get back into Formula One. And it was Gunter Steiner who said, "You've been out for, if you've been out for Formula One for too long, it's hard to come back into it." And for him, Wehrlein, I can't see him ever coming back into it. And if Nico Hulkenberg dips out for a year, 2 years, I can't honestly see him coming back, which would be a massive shame, really, because he is a very talented driver who I think does definitely deserve to have a seat in Formula One. But like you say, unfortunately, because of the lack of spaces and the amount of teams there is in Formula One, it's just not possible. But if the new teams are to come in, the only way I could probably see Nico getting a seat is if they were looking for somebody with experience. But would it be a little too late back then if they come in for 2021, 2022? I'm not sure, but I've got my fingers crossed for him, but it doesn't look good, does it?
No, it doesn't, unfortunately for him, and it is a shame because he is one of those drivers that over the years you've always wanted him to get that elusive podium. He's been so close on a number of occasions, so yeah, it is a shame. However, yeah, I'm just looking at the list, and there is definitely a space for him to fall into Formula E. So that looks like if it wasn't already confirmed that. I'd imagine. I mean, there's space going in the BMW Andretti Motorsport team that are joining the season in Formula E. Jaguar Racing, of course, Mahindra, and the new Neo FE team. So there's going to be a lot of seats, and I'm sure that those teams will all be looking at Nico as coming in for a driver that has just been known for his consistency and just relatively calm nature. So he is definitely a catch for one of these teams, and I would expect him to go into Formula E and be relatively competitive. So as I was looking at the comments, and Charlie said that he wondered if Stroll was Stroll was going to lose a seat at Racing Point next season. And I was saying when I was out in Italy, I was talking to my partner, and I was saying Stroll could theoretically go down as the driver with the most amount of race starts in the history of Formula One, in theory. Because if his dad maintains the team for, say, the next 15 years, unless someone else comes in for him, Lance could end up doing his entire, or the rest of his career in this one team. He could easily beat Rubens Barrichello's record. So, yeah,
Yeah.
what a strange world we live in, that Lance Stroll could potentially be the most or the Formula One driver with the most longevity. Um, but yeah, to go. Going onto the Invictus Racing League results, and of course, if you're new to the podcast, guys, we are Invictus Racing League, an esports league running on PS4 on F1 2019 GC Sport. And Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday we run the F1 2019 leagues. Currently, at the moment, we've got the GT Sport DTM League ongoing, and on Sundays we have the GT Sport LMP1 WEC League. So, yep, it will go over the results for round 8 of the championship, the Chinese Grand Prix. And we started off on Monday, and you can join Sab and I for that. It's the No Assist Championship here on this channel. So if you want to watch it, click that subscribe button. And it was debutant Harry who picked up the win ahead of Charlie, who's joining us this evening, and Scott. So the two Mercedes in second and third, but it's Harry absolutely blinding lap and qualifying, using a little bit of cheeky toe off the back end of the Mercedes of Charlie, but a fantastic race for the rookie.
Yeah, most definitely. He was a bit of an unknown, wasn't he? And he came into it and showing exactly what he can do. And like I said in the commentary on Monday night, if he can come in now and upset some of the guys who are challenging at the top of the championship, then he's doing a good job, isn't he? And he got out into the lead, and he never really looked in doubt of losing it in the end. He drove superbly all night. He's definitely going to be one to keep an eye on for next week. Now we've seen what he can do.
Yeah, so he really deserved that one, and yeah, that's a great way to start your career. We saw Scott did the same thing when he started in Invictus 2 seasons ago, won his first race, and next season went on to win the title. So good omens there for Harry B R25 as he starts in the Racing Point. But it's second place man Charlie who took home the second step on the podium and the lead in the championship. He goes up to 79 points. So if Charlie, we thought coming in that he'd be the number 2 driver to reigning champion Scott, but leads his teammate by 11 points with Scott sitting on 68. So it's been a very consistent sort of middle part of the season for Charlie.
It has, and if you keep this consistency up from now to the end of the season, you can't rule him out of potentially winning the championship. He's definitely probably the most consistent guy in the league at the moment. So if he can keep doing it, like I say, you can't write him off, can you?
No, absolutely not. And one person that we don't tend to mention as well, and we don't see him all too often in the races, but he's only 9 points off the lead of the overall championship. That's CPI Alex. He's in third, 9 points off of Charlie. He's yet to actually pick up a podium so far this season. So it's this CPI Alex kind of going under the radar, but not out of the question for the championship.
No, he isn't, and he's proven, isn't he, that if you are consistent and you pick up regular points, you can be in a championship, even if you've not even been on the podium. Consistency in all these leagues is key, isn't it? If you can be consistent throughout a season, you are going to be there or thereabouts. People who are picking up DNFs and what have you regularly, it harms them a lot more, which is, I know it's obvious to point out, but CPI Alex is doing exactly what he needs to do, is making sure the car stays on the track, making sure he picks up those good points, and it's keeping him within contention.
Yep, so that was round 8 of the No Assist League, and that's of course Monday nights 8 p.m. here on this channel. Click subscribe to watch that, and you can join Sab and I in the commentary box every Monday for that one. We move on to Tuesday night, and it's the Realistic Performance League, and of course it's a league that you drive in, and it was, I'm sure you can talk us through. It was a good one for you.
It was a good one. We had a few issues early on with the lobby. There was a few lag issues and what have you, which unfortunately affected a few people. But it eventually did get going in the end, despite a bit of a delay. There was a good race at the front with Tom PL44S. He took the race win, and I was running in fourth for a very long time, and then Mr. Sky Z, who was going really well in his Alfa Romeo, just lost it out of turn 3 and went into the wall and gifted me third place, which I was delighted about at that point. Stephen and Tom was ahead, a good 7 seconds ahead. Stephen pushing Tom to the absolute limit of the track and just couldn't quite get it done. And then on the final lap, Stephen unfortunately ran out of fuel. He explained after he had a similar situation with me. There was no fuel gauge on the reading on the screen, and he'd been pushing as hard as he possibly can to get that race win, and not realised he was running out of fuel fast. And unfortunately, he lost fuel on that long straight, that really long straight, where it's going to really punish you if you've not got any fuel going down there at slow speeds, and it allowed me to catch him up and overtake him and steal second place for him, unfortunately for Stephen, which dropped him really far down the order. So I think it was 7th in the end, with Mr. Skyzy picking up the final podium position. But yeah, solid drive from Tom. He from what I've seen, he defended superbly all race against Stephen and didn't allow that Ferrari to get past. And for me and Tom, who are teammates, it's maximum points this week in the constructors as well.
Yeah, it was moved Tom up into second in the championship on 57 points, 18 behind the leader of Skyzy, who's on for his third Performance League championship in a row if he is to continue heading up the field as he is at the moment. But Tom up into second, and a long-awaited win for him, so congratulations to Tom for that one. Wave Intel, or Ton Arbanak, drops down to third after retiring in China, and the likes of Ferocious Dan is 28 points off behind, so a big gap between the top 5 at the moment, as it looks like Tom is going to be the closest to catch up to Skyzy if it is going to happen. That is on Tuesday nights 8 p.m. here on this channel, YouTube, and that is with Tim and Malc commentating, so you can catch up with Tim and Malc in the commentary box every Tuesday for that one. Wednesday night, we've got the equal performance leagues, 3 leagues on a Wednesday, F1, F2 and F3, based on performance and or your ability. You get placed into F1, of course, the faster guys, and F3 for the slower guys. And we'll start off in F1. And it was a little bit of a role reversal in F1 compared to Monday night, and this time it was Charlie that took the win ahead of Harry, who started his first F1 race, and those two swapped positions. So Charlie stood on the top step with Harry in second, and another debutant, Luke Kay, came in third. So good, like yourself, who we'll get onto in a minute. Another good week for Charlie.
Yeah, a very good week for Charlie. You can never complain if you're getting 2 podiums and one of them being a win. A great week as well for Harry. He's also picked up 2 wins, and a good debut for Luke as well. So, yeah, F1 League looking quite competitive now with those guys in it. Schofield, though, unfortunately had a not so great race for himself, but he's still quite comfortable, isn't he, at the top of that league?
Yeah, he is indeed. And although we've started to flesh out a little bit more in the numbers of the F1 League with a couple of new additions, which hopefully will benefit it into next season, with Schofielder's absolute dominance with 6 or 5 wins so far this season, and he currently has a 48-point lead in the championship. So it's definitely a game of catch-up with Scope, and he could, in theory, he could have won the championship last night if he had if the results had gone his way, but he can lock it up at the next race if he gets if he outscores M Doran by a certain amount of points. So yeah, Scope absolutely blitzing his way to a second consecutive F1 championship. On to F2, and it was the Warrislander took his 4th race win in a row. The Dutchman absolutely on fire at the moment. He was followed home by countryman Steen and Estonian Easty Mats in 3rd position, as Easty makes it another podium finish from when he started. He's been very competitive in F2, but Warrislander absolutely blitzed it, and we won't talk about my performance because it was absolutely shocking. Unfortunately, it seems like my a slip of my finger on the setup as I look back at my video of the race, and I actually put on the wet setup and not the dry setup. So that's why my car was not turning into any of the corners correctly as I found out of. So we won't talk about that because that was slightly embarrassing. But yeah, congratulations to Warislander, absolutely blitzing it, and he moves into the lead in F2, and definitely starting to look like, if he can keep up the pace, that Warislander can take the F2 championship. But I'm sure the likes of Meg Lugby and Steen will have something to say about that. But equally, all the way down to 7th and possibly even 8th is still in with a shout, depending. Of course, we've got 4 races left to go, so plenty more points left to get in the championship. So F2 alive and well as we head to Bahrain next week. F3, and I'm sure you can talk us through F3 because it was a great night for yourself.
Yes, it was. I started P4. Dan, Ferocious Dan, he unbelievable lap in qualifying on the medium tyre, was a country mile ahead of nearly everybody. He was looking very fast, as always. He has been in this league this season. It was a good start for himself in the race. He got away well, but nice. Nice Niels, I apologise, I got his name wrong again. He started on the soft tyre, which has not really worked for anybody this week, has it? The soft tyres, it's gone off the cliff quite quickly, and within the first lap he lost a few positions. But moving forward, I was challenging Ferocious Dan for a large period of the race for the race lead, and after the pit stop phase I managed to get the undercut on him, and unfortunately had a spin at turn 1 which dropped him down the field, but he did work his way back into 3rd place. Stephen, who's again, he's been absolutely fantastic this season in F3. He's looking very racy. Unfortunately, still not managed to pick up that race win, as I managed to get the win just ahead of him. There was only, I think, in the end about 2.5 seconds covering the top 3. So we had good numbers again in F3 last night, and a good race overall. It was a great competitive race throughout the field, not just at the front. So yeah, good race and a good week for myself, which sees me get further up that ladder. But Dan, finishing 3rd, keeps his place at the top, ahead of Stephen, who's pushing him hard. With only 4 races left, it should be a good battle for the title there. But I'd still say Ferocious Dan's the title favourite.
Yeah, 2 second places in a row for Stephen, which has been magic for him. It's been really good. He's been one of the drivers that is just improved season upon season upon season, and MJ Coop, admin for F2 and driver across several leagues, has been compiling all the records of all time here at Invictus, and unfortunately Stephen, joint with F1 Richard, who's currently 4th in the F3 standings, is currently sitting on the record, the unwanted record of, I believe last night was his 40th race here in Invictus Equal Performance Leagues without a victory. So he is the joint leader of the longest winless streak. So 2 second place finishes in the last 2 races, and then 3 in the past 4 races. So he's getting closer and closer and closer. Only 8 points between himself and Dan. 1 point back to Mike, who missed the first 2 races of the season as well. So yeah, it's going to be incredibly close finish in F3 over the next 4 races of the season. And of course, you can follow that one on YouTube on Wednesday nights with Malc in the commentary box. And of course, just say as well, F2 is commentated by Dan, or Energy Dan. So yeah, fantastic commentator. And yeah, you can see Tim commentating on F1, Dan on F2, and Malc on F3, 8 p.m. every Wednesday here on YouTube. And that is us done for the round 8 results here at China. Bahrain next week. Is it a circuit you enjoy? It's my favourite this season, so I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I do like Bahrain. It's a good race around there. I've raced several times in Invictus around there and had good races around there before. So hopefully, if I can get some practice in at some point, I should go well around there. But I've probably just jinxed myself, so I'll not say no more.
Well, you're only 18 points off the lead, so never say never.
No
And
pressure.
yeah, that's us done for F1 2019. Of course, as I said before, GT Sport is underway at the moment in the DTM League, and you can equally find that on the channel. It should be streaming live at the moment, and then of course on Sundays it is the LMP1 WEC League. So plenty more racing across the week. And you can find that all here on YouTube. And that's us pretty much done. Of course, we've got the one final thing left to do, and it's the hot lap question. And I will give Sab a question. He has 1 minute to give me the answer and explain the reason for it. And tonight, of course, we were talking about the Singapore Grand Prix. And I mentioned briefly that there's only been 3 winners of the Singaporean Grand Prix in its 11 or 10-year iteration, so we've had Fernando Alonso's taken home 2 wins. Lewis and Seb sit on 4. Now, what driver at their peak is better, Seb, Lewis, or Fernando?
Oh wow. Is that round? Can I just clarify? Is that round Singapore or in entirely?
In general, who at their peak was a better driver?
Wow. um. This is tough. I'm probably going to just shade it to Lewis because, yeah, I'll shade it. If you would like me to order it, I'd go with Lewis, Seb, and Fernando, but they're all unique in their own ways. Lewis, I think, is just got that something special when it comes to qualifying, I think, and his ability to pull a race out in all different types of conditions. Yeah, I'll go in Lewis, but only just.
Yeah, seems like Charlie's agreeing with you with that one there. So, but if you don't agree with us, let us know by going to the socials, Invictus RL on Twitter and Instagram, Invictus Racing League on Facebook. Equally, you can find Sab and I on Twitter at GT2_driving, for myself at Alan Sabatino, for Sab. Let him know if you think he's wrong by going there and and telling him who and what order you'd put those in. But that's us done for this week. We hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you join us next week for the 14th episode of the Invictus podcast, where I'm sure we'll be reviewing the Singapore Grand Prix and equally bringing you the results for the Bahrainian Grand Prix, part of the Invictus Racing League F1 2019. And yeah, hope you've enjoyed it, guys. We will see you next week. Make sure you join us on Monday nights at 8 p.m. for the No Assist Championship. And but for the rest of the week, have a great weekend. Hope you enjoy the race, and we will see you next week.